I had millions in the bank, and my son was my world. That's when I lost him forever. It's a moment I'll never forget. At 71, I had built my empire, a life of success I thought would last forever. Yet, in an instant, it all came crashing down. My son, Michael, was my pride. We had shared everything, my achievements, my dreams for him, and the hopes of a future where we would enjoy the fruits of my hard work together. But that morning, everything changed. It was an ordinary day, one I had expected to spend like any other, but it became a nightmare. Michael had been in a car accident, and it took his life away before I could even say goodbye. The news hit me like a tidal wave, and I could barely catch my breath. The hospital called, and all I could hear was the cold voice on the other end, delivering the words I never imagined would be said to me. My son was gone. The world seemed to stop spinning. I didn't even get the chance to say I love you one last time, the words that should have left my mouth, but instead, the only sound I heard was the heavy silence that followed. I had worked my entire life to secure a future for him, and now I was left with nothing but empty rooms and memories. Michael had been my hope, my connection to the world outside my wealth, but now, he was gone. The house felt too big, too quiet. The walls that once held the laughter of our family now seemed to mock me with their silence. My son, who had always been there for me, was taken in an instant, and there was nothing I could do to bring him back. The days that followed were filled with endless questions. What could I have done differently? Why had I not spent more time with him, enjoying the small moments, rather than focusing so much on my work and wealth? It was as if everything I had done for him was now meaningless. The house, the money, the legacy, it all seemed irrelevant in the face of the loss I felt in my heart. Michael had been the light of my life, the one person who truly understood me, and now he was gone. My days became a blur, filled with phone calls, arrangements, and the cold, hard reality that I would never hear his voice again. I kept thinking back to the days when we were younger, when he would run to me after school, excited to share his day. I could still picture him, his smile, the sparkle in his eyes. But those memories only made the pain of his absence sharper. I had all the wealth I could ever want, but it couldn't bring my son back. I realized, too late, that the things that mattered most, love, family, connection, had been overshadowed by my focus on success and money. Now, all I had left were regrets. I had millions in the bank, but it meant nothing without Michael by my side. It was a lesson learned too late, but a lesson nonetheless. Life is fragile, and no amount of money can replace the people you love. And as I stood there, in the empty house that once echoed with his laughter, I understood the true cost of losing what truly mattered. The days after Michael's death were a blur of numbness. I couldn't even remember the last time I had felt truly alive, as if his absence had taken everything from me, even the ability to feel. The house that was once filled with laughter, with his endless stories about work and his life, was now just an empty shell, echoing with the silence of a life no longer lived. The air felt thicker, as if it was pressing down on me, reminding me that no matter how much wealth I had, none of it mattered now. I spent days locked in my bedroom, staring at the walls, trying to hold on to the memories of Michael, but it was as if they were slipping through my fingers. My mind kept replaying his last words to me, a simple goodbye over the phone, the last conversation we ever had. I hadn't known it would be our last, hadn't known that would be the last time I would hear his voice. That thought alone crushed me every time I tried to focus. I thought about the phone call I had received that day, the moment the world as I knew it fell apart. The officer on the other end, his voice so cold, and the words that didn't make sense, "Your son has been in a car accident." "I'm so sorry." Those words echoed in my mind constantly, but nothing could prepare me for the silence that followed. The complete silence that flooded my house. The emptiness that settled into every corner of every room. I hadn't been able to process it at first. It had been a shock. It was as if time had stopped, and everything that had seemed important before his death suddenly didn't matter. I had spent decades building my fortune, focusing all my energy on work, on securing a future for us both, yet when it came down to it, I couldn't protect him. I couldn't save him. And that realization hit me harder than anything else. I had spent years away from him, thinking I was doing the right thing, providing everything he could ever want or need, yet I had missed the most important part of his life, him. His heart, his laughter, his presence. I had been too focused on the future, too obsessed with securing a legacy, while he had been right in front of me, needing my attention, my love, my time. And now it was too late. I walked around the house aimlessly, as if expecting to see him walk through the door any moment. I knew it wasn't going to happen, but the hope lingered, just out of reach. I found myself walking into his room, the one he had stayed in when he visited. It was untouched, the bed neatly made, a faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. I sat on the edge of the bed, and for a moment, I closed my eyes, trying to remember what it had felt like to have him here, to have him close. It felt like a lifetime ago. I could still hear his voice in my head, telling me everything would be fine, that he was fine, that he was happy. I never asked him enough about his life, about what was truly going on in his world. I never asked the questions that mattered, the ones that could have brought us closer. Now, it was too late. I couldn't even remember the last time we shared a real conversation. The house was so quiet. The sound of my footsteps on the hardwood floors was the only noise, and it made the emptiness feel even more real. I tried to keep myself busy, to keep my mind occupied, but it was like trying to hold on to water. I felt like I was drowning in my own grief, unable to breathe, unable to move forward. There were days when I just sat, staring into nothing, wishing I could go back in time and do things differently. I wish I had spent more time with him, told him how much he meant to me, how proud I was of him. But that opportunity was gone, and nothing could bring it back. The wealth I had accumulated over the years, the success I had worked so hard to achieve, suddenly felt meaningless. What was the point of all of it if I had no one to share it with? What was the point of having everything if I had lost the one person who had mattered the most to me? I knew I had to keep going. I knew I had to find a way to live, to move forward. But the truth was, I didn't know how. I didn't know how to live in a world where Michael didn't exist. Every corner of the house reminded me of him, every room, every piece of furniture had a memory attached to it. I tried to avoid those memories, tried to push them away, but they kept coming back, flooding my mind, and the grief would hit me all over again. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the truth, that he was gone. I looked out the window, watching the leaves fall from the trees, the world moving on without me. And for the first time, I felt completely lost. My wealth, my success, none of it could change the fact that I had lost my son, and that was a loss I could never recover from. I knew I would have to go on, but it didn't feel like I was living. It felt like I was just going through the motions, waiting for something, anything, to make sense again. I woke up that morning feeling as though nothing had changed. The house was still as silent as it had been the day Michael died, and the emptiness felt even deeper today. I hadn't left the house in days, and the thought of seeing anyone, of facing the world outside, seemed unbearable. But I knew I couldn't stay in this endless cycle of grief. I had to do something, anything, to keep my mind occupied, even if it meant confronting the reality I had been trying to avoid. I went into the kitchen, but the moment I set foot inside, I was reminded of the small moments with Michael. He used to sit at that table, laughing about his day, his voice filling the air. But now, it was just me, and the silence felt suffocating. I made my coffee mechanically, each motion feeling like I was on autopilot. I could hear the drip of the coffee maker, and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Time was moving on, but I wasn't. Not really. I sat down with my cup of coffee and stared at the empty chair where Michael used to sit. I hadn't realized how much I relied on him being there, how much I relied on his presence to make me feel connected to the world. I thought back to when he was younger, how he would talk about his dreams and his plans. He had always been so full of life, so full of hope. Now, those dreams, those plans, were all gone. And I was left with nothing but the memories. My thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. I hesitated, not wanting to answer, but eventually, I picked it up. It was a call from Michael's wife. Her voice was polite, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. "Hi, Dorothy," she said. I've been meaning to talk to you about something. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. What is it? I asked, trying to sound calm. Well, it's about Michael's things. We need to start sorting through them, and I was wondering if you wanted to help. I felt my heart tighten in my chest. Michael's things, his clothes, his books, the things he had left behind. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't know if I ever would be. But I couldn't tell her that. Instead, I nodded again, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, of course. When do you want to start? How about tomorrow? She asked. We can go through his things, see what needs to be kept, and what can be donated. I agreed to meet her, though I wasn't sure if I was doing it for myself or for her. Maybe it was a way to feel close to Michael again, to touch the things he had left behind, to hold on to something, anything, that reminded me of him. The next day, I drove over to their house. I hadn't been there since the funeral, and the thought of seeing it again, without Michael, made my stomach turn. But I had made the commitment, and I couldn't back out now. When I arrived, she greeted me at the door, and we went inside together. The house felt strange, emptier than it had before. I could still see the remnants of Michael in every room, the books on the shelf, the papers on the desk. It was as if he had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. But he wasn't coming back. We spent the next few hours going through his things. I kept my emotions in check, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. But it was hard, so hard. Each item we picked up seemed to carry the weight of all the memories I had with him. It wasn't just the physical objects that hurt, it was the realization that I would never see him again, that those memories were all I had left. His wife, Emily, was quiet most of the time, her movements stiff. I could tell she was having a hard time, too. Every now and then, she would glance at me, her face unreadable, before turning back to the box of items we were sorting through. She wasn't the same person I remembered. I couldn't help but feel that something had changed between us, between all of us, since Michael's death. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of everything, the pain of losing Michael, the overwhelming sense of loneliness, it was all too much. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment to breathe. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My face was tired, my eyes dull from lack of sleep, from the weight of the grief that had been suffocating me for days. I didn't know how to move forward, how to live in a world where Michael wasn't there. But I knew I had to. I had to keep going, for myself, for him, for the life we had shared. When I returned to the living room, Emily had finished packing up some of Michael's things. She looked up at me, her expression strained. I think that's all we can do for today, she said quietly. I'll come by tomorrow to finish up. I nodded, feeling the tears welling up inside me. But I didn't let them fall. I had learned to hold everything in, to hide the pain behind a mask of composure. As I walked out of the house, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but only slightly. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the future without Michael, but I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to find a way to move forward, to make peace with the loss, even if it felt impossible. The road ahead was uncertain, and the grief was still raw, but I had no choice but to keep walking, one step at a time. I didn't expect it, but as the days passed, something in me shifted. The grief, though still there, didn't feel as suffocating as it once had. I found myself walking around the house more, seeing things differently. Michael was gone, but I had to find a way to live with his absence. I couldn't keep hiding behind the sadness, waiting for something that would never come. I started organizing the house, tidying up the rooms that felt like a museum of our past. I dusted off the furniture, wiped away the marks on the walls, and slowly, I began to take control again. It wasn't much, but it was something. The first time I went to the grocery store alone, I felt strange. The simple act of picking out food, of deciding what to cook, was suddenly overwhelming. I had always cooked for Michael and me, but now it felt like I was doing it for no one. It was in those small moments that the reality of his absence hit me the hardest. I passed by his favorite snacks in the aisles and felt a pang of loss. I thought about how he would have grabbed a bag of chips without a second thought, how he would have joked about me always buying the same things. I missed those little moments, those quiet times together that had seemed so insignificant at the time but now felt like the most precious memories I had. But I kept going. I started taking walks around the neighborhood, trying to reconnect with the world outside the walls of my home. I would pass by families, mothers with children, people laughing and talking, and I would feel a pang of longing. I knew I would never have that again, not in the same way. My family was broken, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be fixed. Michael's death had left a hole in all of us, and no amount of time or healing would fill it. As I walked, I began to think more about my life, about what I wanted for myself. For years, I had lived for others, providing for Michael, building my wealth, creating a future that we could share. But now, that future was gone, and I was left with myself. It was terrifying, but it was also a wake-up call. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of what I had lost. I needed to find a new path, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. The thought of it made me uneasy, but I also knew it was the only way forward. I had to find purpose again. I started spending more time with friends, reconnecting with people I hadn't seen in years. I began volunteering at the local shelter, helping others who were struggling in ways I had never imagined. It wasn't a solution, but it gave me a sense of peace, a reminder that there was still good in the world, still people who needed help. Slowly, my world began to expand again. I didn't know how to live without Michael, but I knew that I couldn't stay in this isolated, lonely bubble I had created. I had to honor his memory by living, by finding joy in the small things, by pushing through the grief and accepting that life goes on. It wasn't easy, and it never would be, but I was starting to understand something I hadn't before. He wouldn't want me to give up. He would want me to keep going, to find new joy, to live for the both of us. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep me moving forward. I thought about the conversations we used to have, how he would always tell me to live life to the fullest, to never settle for less. I had always thought I was doing just that, but now I saw that there was so much more to life than the work, the money, the things I had chased after for so long. What mattered most was the people we love, the moments we share, and the way we choose to live when everything seems lost. And with that realization, I knew I had to take the next step. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be fast. But I had to start somewhere. So, I did. I began to live again. Not for the world, not for the things I had achieved, but for myself, for the memories I had with Michael, and for the new ones I was starting to create, even if they were small, even if they didn't seem like much. It was a new chapter, and though I was afraid of what it might bring, I was also ready to face it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, and I held onto it tightly, knowing that this was just the beginning. I woke up early the next morning, the skies still dark outside. I could feel the weight of the day ahead pressing down on me already. It had been weeks since Michael's passing, but it still felt like I was stuck in the same moment, like time hadn't moved at all. I made myself a cup of coffee, the same way I always did, but this time, it tasted different. The warmth from the cup didn't quite reach my soul. I could still see his face in my mind, his smile, the way he used to laugh at the smallest things. The coffee had always been a simple comfort for us both, but now it just seemed to remind me of the void he had left behind. I couldn't keep living like this, stuck in the past, drowning in memories. But the thought of moving forward seemed impossible. How does one move on from losing someone who was so much a part of your life, so much a part of you? I walked around the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. I hadn't touched Michael's things since we'd gone through them together. His clothes, his books, his old baseball glove, everything was still exactly where he had left it. I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. But I knew I had to. The pain was unbearable, but I couldn't keep holding on to things that weren't real anymore. I had to face it, face the reality that he was gone. And maybe, just maybe, that would help me heal. The house was too quiet without him. It was too big, too empty. I found myself walking into the living room, the same room where we had spent so many evenings together. I sat on the couch, looking at the old photographs on the wall. Pictures of Michael as a child, his graduation day, his wedding. Each photo was a snapshot of a time that felt so distant now, yet it was still fresh in my mind. I could hear his voice, his laughter, as if he were still here with me. But he wasn't. I had to let go. But how? I couldn't seem to find the answer. I spent the rest of the morning in silence, just thinking, just being with my thoughts. The emptiness in my chest was suffocating, but I tried to breathe through it. I knew I couldn't keep living in this place of sorrow. The next day, I decided to leave the house for a while. I needed a change of scenery, something to break the cycle. I called an old friend, someone I hadn't seen in years, and asked if she would meet me for lunch. It was a small step, but it was a step. I needed to remind myself that I wasn't completely alone, that there were still people who cared. When I met her at the cafe, I could see the concern in her eyes. She asked how I was doing, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't just nod and say, "I'm fine." I told her the truth. I told her how much I missed Michael, how lost I felt without him. It felt good to say it out loud, to not keep it bottled up inside. She listened patiently, offering comfort without judgment, and for that, I was grateful. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there were still people who cared. The next few weeks were a blur of small steps. I went back to the house, slowly starting to clean out Michael's things. It was painful, but it was necessary. I donated some of his clothes, packed up the things that reminded me of him, and slowly started to make the house feel like my own again. It was a process, and it wasn't easy, but with each passing day, I felt a little bit lighter. I began spending more time outside, taking walks in the park, getting fresh air. I started reading again, something I hadn't done in ages. I even joined a local yoga class, just to do something to reconnect with myself. It wasn't about forgetting Michael, it could never be about that, but it was about learning how to live without him. It was about finding a way to heal, to move forward, to embrace the future instead of being stuck in the past. One day, I was sitting in the park, watching the sun set, when I realized something important. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't consumed by grief. I was still sad, of course, but I wasn't drowning in it anymore. I had started to find my way again. And that realization, small as it was, felt like a victory. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me or what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure, I was finally starting to live again. It was a long road ahead, and I knew there would be days when the sadness would return, when the grief would hit me like a wave. But I also knew that I had the strength to keep going, to keep moving forward. Michael would always be a part of me, and I would never forget him. But now, I had to make a life for myself, a life that honored him, but also allowed me to heal. And that was enough to give me hope. I spent the following week still finding my way, piece by piece, as the grief ebbed away, slowly but surely. It wasn't a linear process, and I didn't expect it to be. One moment, I would feel at peace, perhaps even content, but the next, something would trigger the familiar sadness, and I would be back to where I started. But the more time passed, the more I realized that it wasn't about avoiding the sadness or pushing it away, it was about learning to live with it. I had come to accept that it would always be a part of me, woven into the fabric of my life. But that didn't mean I had to let it consume me. I found solace in the small moments of peace, the quiet afternoons when I could sit in the garden with a cup of tea, watching the flowers bloom. I began to enjoy the silence, finding comfort in the solitude. It wasn't loneliness, it was just me, finally allowing myself to breathe again. One evening, I went for a walk in the park. It was a warm spring evening, the sky painted in soft hues of orange and pink, and as I walked along the path, I couldn't help but notice how much I had missed in the world around me. The trees were in full bloom, and the air smelled sweet with the scent of flowers. The park was busy, families enjoying the evening, children playing, dogs running around with their owners. I found myself smiling, realizing that this was what I had been missing for so long, life going on, life moving forward. The next morning, I got an unexpected call. It was from my old friend, Ruth, the one I had reconnected with weeks ago. She had invited me to dinner, and though I hadn't seen her in years, I felt a warmth inside me at the thought of spending time with someone who had known me before everything changed. I didn't know what I was expecting, but when I walked into her house that evening, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Ruth's home was cozy, filled with the kind of warmth I had missed, soft lighting, the smell of food wafting from the kitchen. She welcomed me with open arms, and as we sat down to dinner, I realized how much I had been craving genuine conversation, something more than the silence I had become so used to. We talked for hours, catching up on everything, from the small details of everyday life to the bigger changes that had occurred over the years. As the night wore on, I realized how much I had been missing this kind of connection. I had been so wrapped up in my grief, so consumed by the pain of losing Michael, that I had forgotten how important it was to nurture the relationships around me. Ruth's presence reminded me of the joy that could still be found in life. The evening ended with a hug, and as I walked back to my car, I felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't a cure for the pain, but it was a reminder that life was still beautiful, even after loss. That night, I went to bed with a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds singing outside my window. I got up, opened the curtains, and looked out at the bright day ahead. It was a new beginning, a chance to start over, to rebuild a life that I could be proud of. The grief would always be there, lingering in the background, but I had come to realize that it didn't have to define me. I had to live for myself, for the person I had been before everything changed, and for the person I was becoming now. As the weeks went by, I started taking more steps to take care of myself. I began exercising regularly, something I had always neglected in the past. I joined a yoga class, not just for the physical benefits but for the mental clarity it brought. I started cooking more, experimenting with new recipes, and rediscovering my love for food. It wasn't about filling the void that Michael had left, but rather about finding joy in the small things again. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again. There were still tough days, days when the grief would come rushing back, but I had learned to manage it. I had learned that it was okay to feel the pain, but that it didn't have to control my life. I began to reach out more to the people around me, reconnecting with old friends, spending time with my neighbors, and slowly rebuilding my social circle. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't instant, but it was progress. One day, while I was out for a walk, I ran into one of my neighbors, a woman named Helen who had lived next door for years. We had always exchanged pleasantries, but we had never really spoken much. That day, however, we stopped to chat, and for the first time in a long while, I realized that I wasn't alone. There were people around me who cared, who were willing to listen and offer support. It was a reminder that I didn't have to go through this journey alone. As the months passed, I found myself thinking less about the past and more about the future. I had started to embrace the idea that life was unpredictable, and while I couldn't control everything, I could control how I responded to it. I began to set new goals for myself, not to replace what I had lost, but to honor the life I still had. There was so much more to experience, so many more memories to be made. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to embrace the unknown. I still carried the pain of losing Michael with me, but it no longer defined who I was. It was a part of me, yes, but it was no longer the only thing that defined my life. I had come to realize that life, though fleeting, was also beautiful. And as I walked forward, I knew that Michael would always be with me, in my heart, in my memories, and in the new life I was starting to build. I woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The sun was already high in the sky, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like it was okay to start living again. I had spent the last few weeks slowly reawakening my life, but today felt different. It was as though I had finally found my footing, even though the grief still lingered like an old shadow. I got up, made my bed, and started a pot of coffee. The scent filled the house, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to smile. It was the little things, the mundane rituals, that had always given me comfort. But now, they carried a deeper meaning. I was starting to find joy in them again, not because I was forgetting what had happened, but because I was learning to live with it. I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, something I hadn't done in weeks. The fresh air hit my face like a gentle embrace, and as I walked, I noticed the world around me in a new light. The trees were green, the birds were singing, and the houses along the street were full of life. For so long, I had been living in a fog, unable to see the beauty in the world because of the darkness that clouded my mind. But today, I saw it clearly. I walked past the park, where children were playing, and families were enjoying the day. The laughter of the children brought a bittersweet smile to my face. I remembered Michael at that age, running around the park with his friends, full of energy and joy. I missed him more than words could express, but today, I was learning to appreciate the moments I still had. As I continued my walk, I began to think about what I wanted for the future. I had spent so many years focused on Michael's future, on building a life for both of us, that I had lost sight of my own dreams. But now, with him gone, I had to find a new path. It wasn't about replacing him, or trying to fill the void he left behind. It was about honoring his memory by living a life that made me proud. I had to find purpose again. When I returned home, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was the first time in a long while that I hadn't been weighed down by grief. I knew it would return, that the sadness would creep back in at times, but for now, I was content. I had started to rebuild, and that was enough. Later that day, I received a call from Emily, Michael's wife. I hadn't spoken to her much since his death, and honestly, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. But she had been a part of his life, and maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of healing for both of us. "Hi, Dorothy," she said, her voice sounding nervous. "I know it's been a while, but I was wondering if we could meet. I think it's time we talk." I agreed, even though I wasn't sure what she wanted to say. It felt like a step I had to take, even if it was uncomfortable. The next day, we met at a cafe, a neutral place where we could talk without the weight of the past hanging over us. I could tell she was nervous, just as I was. We sat down, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, she cleared her throat and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I know things have been difficult, Dorothy," she began, her voice shaking. "And I know that I haven't been there for you, but I want to change that." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure if I could forgive her for the way things had unfolded after Michael's death. There had been moments when I felt like she had distanced herself from me, that I had been left out of her grief, too. But as I looked at her, I realized that she was hurting just as much as I was. We had both lost him. "I've been so lost, Dorothy," she continued. "I didn't know how to handle everything. I'm sorry if I pushed you away." It wasn't an apology I had expected, but it was one I needed to hear. I nodded, unable to find the words. She reached out and took my hand, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely alone. We talked for hours, sharing stories about Michael, remembering the good times, the moments that had made him who he was. It wasn't about forgiving or forgetting, but about understanding that grief didn't have to divide us. After we left the cafe, I felt a small weight lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't a solution, but it was a step in the right direction. Emily and I were both learning how to live with the loss of Michael. And that was all we could do. The days that followed were filled with small victories. I started taking up hobbies I had put on hold for years, painting, reading, writing, and for the first time, I felt a sense of purpose beyond my grief. I wasn't moving on, I wasn't forgetting, but I was learning to live again. The house felt less empty with each passing day. I began to fill it with new memories, new experiences, and I realized that I was still capable of finding joy. The grief would never leave completely, but it no longer controlled me. I was starting to heal, piece by piece, and for the first time in months, I was looking forward to the future. I still missed Michael, more than words could ever express, but I knew that I had to keep going, not just for him, but for me. I woke up one morning to the sound of birds outside my window, the sunlight streaming through the curtains. It felt like the first real morning in a long time, as if I had finally woken up from a long, restless sleep. I sat up in bed and looked around the room, the same room I had spent countless nights in, but today it felt different. It felt like it had finally become mine again. For the first time in months, I didn't feel suffocated by the memories, by the grief that had held me captive. I had spent so much time trying to figure out how to live without Michael, but now, I was realizing that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to live without him completely. He would always be with me, in my heart, in my memories, but I could still move forward. The grief wasn't a wall, it was a part of me, something I could carry with me, but it didn't have to define me. I got up, made my bed, and went into the kitchen. The same morning routine I had always had, but this time, it felt like I was doing it for me. I made myself a cup of coffee, something simple, but it felt like a new beginning. It was a small gesture, but it was mine. I took my coffee and went outside, sitting on the porch as the world around me began to wake up. The trees were full of life, and the air was fresh and crisp. I closed my eyes for a moment, just breathing it all in. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. It wasn't that the sadness had gone away, it was still there, lingering just beneath the surface, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. I had learned how to live with it, how to allow it to exist without letting it control me. The morning felt like a promise. A promise that there was still time left, still life left to live. I had spent so much of my time focusing on what I had lost, but now, I was ready to focus on what I still had. I had my health, my memories, and the possibility of a future. I didn't know what that future would look like yet, but I was starting to be okay with not knowing. I didn't need to have everything figured out. I just needed to take the next step. That afternoon, I went for a walk, just around the neighborhood. It was a quiet walk, just me and my thoughts. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on everything around me. The streets were peaceful, the kind of peaceful that only a late afternoon could bring. As I walked, I noticed how much the world had changed since I had last really looked at it. The flowers were blooming, the trees were full of leaves, and people were going about their lives, moving forward. I had spent so much time in the past, in my memories, but today, I was seeing the present. I was here, I was alive, and I was moving forward. I knew it wouldn't always be easy. There would be days when the grief would feel too heavy, days when I would miss Michael so much it would take my breath away. But I was learning that it was okay to feel that way. It was okay to miss him. It was okay to feel sad. It didn't mean I wasn't moving forward. It just meant that I was human. And that was enough. As the days passed, I began to realize that healing wasn't about forgetting or moving on completely. It was about finding a way to live with the loss, to carry it with me without letting it consume me. I could still have a life. I could still find joy. And that was something I hadn't believed was possible for a long time. I started doing things I had put off for years. I took up painting again, something I had always loved but had abandoned after Michael died. I went to the local library and checked out a few books, just to remind myself that I could still enjoy the simple things. I even started volunteering at the community center, helping with their programs for seniors. It felt good to give back, to connect with others, and to feel like I was part of something bigger than myself. Each day, I grew stronger. Each day, I took a step forward, even if it was a small one. I was learning to embrace the life I had left, the life I still had the chance to live. I had come so far, and I knew I still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to keep going. I was ready to face the future, whatever it held, because I knew I could handle it. I wasn't the same person I had been before Michael died. I wasn't the same person I had been even a few months ago. But that didn't mean I was broken. It just meant that I had been changed. And I was learning to live with that change, to grow through it. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And I knew, deep down, that Michael would have wanted me to keep living, to keep moving forward, to find happiness again. And for him, I would. I woke up to the sound of the rain tapping softly on the windows. It was the kind of morning that felt reflective, the kind where time seemed to slow down, allowing you to think about everything and nothing all at once. I had spent months slowly rebuilding my life, finding small moments of peace, and reconnecting with the world around me. But today, it felt different. Today, I was ready to let go of the last remnants of the past, to embrace the future without the weight of grief holding me back. It wasn't that the pain was gone, it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. But I had learned to carry it without letting it consume me. The rain continued, a gentle reminder of how everything in life moves, shifts, and changes. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, the warmth of the mug in my hands grounding me. I had come so far since Michael's death, and yet, there were moments when the grief still hit me like a wave, unexpected and overwhelming. But now, I understood that grief didn't have to define me. It wasn't something to run from or fight against, it was something to live with. And in that living, I had started to find peace. I had spent so many years focusing on the future, on securing everything for both of us. I had been so consumed with planning, with building a legacy, that I had missed out on the simple joys of life, the quiet moments, the laughter, the things that didn't need to be planned or achieved. Now, I was learning to appreciate those moments. I wasn't just existing, I was living. I had started volunteering at the community center more regularly, something I had always meant to do but never had the time for. I worked with the elderly, helping them with anything they needed. It felt good to give back, to be present for others, and to see the smiles on their faces. It was a small thing, but it made a difference. It made me feel like I was part of something larger than myself. And that feeling of connection, of helping others, was more rewarding than any material success I had ever achieved. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began to rebuild my social life. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and slowly started to fill my life with the relationships I had neglected for so long. I went out more, took short trips to nearby towns, and even started painting again, something I had loved doing when I was younger. It wasn't just about keeping busy, it was about finding joy in the things I had once forgotten. It was about rediscovering who I was, apart from the person I had been when Michael was alive. I realized that life could still be beautiful, even without him. He had been my world, but I couldn't let his absence steal the beauty of the world that was still around me. And for the first time in a long while, I was beginning to see the world as it was, without the lens of grief clouding my vision. One afternoon, I met Emily for coffee. It had been months since our last conversation, and though things between us were still fragile, I felt ready to talk. She had always been a part of Michael's life, and now, it felt like we needed to find some kind of peace, for him, for us. We sat down in a quiet corner of the cafe, and as I looked at her, I saw the same pain in her eyes that I felt in mine. "How have you been?" she asked, her voice soft, as if unsure of how to proceed. "I've been learning," I said, smiling gently. "It's been hard, but I'm finding my way. I think I'm finally ready to live again." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'm sorry for everything, Dorothy. I know I haven't been the best support. I didn't know how to handle it all. I was just so lost in my own grief." "I know," I said, "and I understand. We were both lost, in different ways. But I think we're both finding our way back now." She looked at me with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "Do you think we can ever be friends again?" she asked. I took a deep breath, considering her words. I had spent so much time thinking about Michael, about his life, his legacy, but I hadn't stopped to think about my own future, my own relationships. "I think we can," I said finally, "but it will take time. We both have to heal in our own way. And maybe that means being there for each other, even if it's not perfect." She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of the past lift just a little. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was understanding. And that, I realized, was a step in the right direction. As I walked home that afternoon, the rain had stopped, and the sun was peeking through the clouds. I felt lighter, like a small piece of the burden had been lifted. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but I was finally starting to see the world with new eyes. I was beginning to live again, not in spite of my grief, but with it. It was a part of me, yes, but it didn't define me. I was more than my loss. And for the first time, I felt that I could look forward to the future, even without Michael by my side.